Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our last episode, we discussed the fourth battle of the Eight-Gate Formation, where, in the final moments, the primordial demon Ultima demonstrated her impeccable strength, defeating the Empire's second-ranked Damrata. As Damrata lay on the brink of death, he realized the truth about Emperor Rudra, that Rudra was no longer himself but had been completely dominated by his skill, Lord of Justice. Following this, Ultima and Damrata entered into a contract, and Ultima absorbed Damrata's soul and became the Fist Demon. In this episode, we will discuss the battle between Primordial Yellow Carrera and the Empire's top-ranked Tatsuya Kondou. Let's get started. In the center of the circular arena, Agera challenged Tatsuya Kondou, expressing his anticipation for a sword fight worthy of their shared discipline. Tatsuya Kondou, with a frown and without uttering a word, raised his hand holding a military sword, casting a glance at Carrera, who was observing the scene. Feeling somewhat bored with the timing of such a request, he agreed to Agera's challenge. However, just as Agera prepared for a dignified sword fight, a crisp gunshot rang out, and Agera fell to the ground. Carrera instantly closed the distance between them, intercepting Tatsuya Kondou's blade aimed at decapitating Agera. Tatsuya Kondou expressed his lack of interest in prolonging this farce with Carrera and Agera, turning to face Carrera as if mocking the naivete of such actions in wartime. Carrera, now serious, declared herself as Tatsuya Kondou's true opponent. Meanwhile, Agera employed his newly acquired ultimate gift, blade transformation, turning into a golden military sword wielded by none other than Carrera. Tatsuya Kondou, accusing Agera of impersonating the founder of the hazy style, vowed to use his full power for punishment, showing unmasked hostility. Both parties assumed their stances, marking the commencement of their battle. Tatsuya Kondou made the first move, launching the hazy style skill Thunder of Heaven and Earth, and charged forward. Carrera deftly rolled on the ground to dodge the attack, then quickly stood up and aimed her sword at Tatsuya Kondou's eyes. Kondou skillfully deflected it with his blade. However, in that instant, an anomaly occurred around Carrera as a wide-ranging gravitational field suddenly formed, causing the ground to crack under the intense pressure. Yet Kondou did not panic and responded by sniping with the gun in his right hand. With the sound of gunfire, the gravitational field around them dissipated. This bullet, known as the Spell Bullet, lived up to its name by negating the effects of magic. Kondou's ultimate skill, Lord of Judgment, produced 4 types of effects: Dispel, which could nullify magic effects; Remove, capable of breaking defensive barriers; Necrosis, designed to disrupt an opponent's magical circuits; Erase, which could discern an opponent's nature and deplete their energy; and finally, the most powerful, Judgment, embodying all 4 effects. It was Kondou's ability to adapt to various situations and perfectly predict the course of battle that established him as the strongest among the Imperial Guardians. Carrera found herself in a challenging position and questioned Kondou on how he anticipated her use of magic. Kondou suggested that he would have done the same in her place. Curiosity piqued about her formidable opponent, Carrera, though slightly displeased, couldn't help but show a delighted expression. It had been a long time since she had encountered an opponent against whom she could go all out. The mere prospect of a satisfying battle was enough to stir Carrera's blood. After a brief silence, Kondou launched another series of slashes at Carrera. Despite wielding the sword in his left hand, his strikes were impeccably accurate. Carrera dodged to the side, then leaned in to aim a slash at Kondou's shoulder. The clashing of their blades produced a grating sound, sending tremors through the air before they both retreated to create distance. A cold smirk formed on Kondou's lips as he prepared to fire a lethal shot with his right hand, not giving Carrera a chance to steady herself. Yes, with a sword in his left hand and a gun in his right, this was Kondou's battle stance. Unfortunately for him, Carrera had identified his weakness during their brief blade engagement. Seizing the perfect moment, Carrera threw her sword at Kondou, who, caught off guard, used his gun to block it. Carrera didn't stop there, she charged at Kondou. In the next instant, Kondou's handgun was knocked out of his grasp and fell to the ground. Carrera couldn't help but laugh at the sight, but a chilling sensation suddenly crept up behind her. Before the sword even reached her, the cold aura of the blade had already enveloped Carrera. She quickly turned, and as the sword energy that filled the air vanished, a single blade sliced through the air, effortlessly cutting through Carrera's orichalcum-constructed bones, severing her left arm. Kondou merely pursed his lips, clearly dissatisfied with only severing one of Carrera's arms. He gripped his military sword in both hands, adopting a stance that was entirely different from his previous one-handed sword and gun posture. Carrera's anger surged. She realized that Kondou had never intended to rely on his gun from the start. He had deliberately exposed a flaw to lure her in, and she had foolishly taken the bait, which must have looked ridiculous to onlookers. However, Carrera quickly regained her composure. Carrera admitted to herself, facing a mere human as an opponent, she had actually contemplated taking the fight seriously. She then picked up her arm, which had fallen aside, gently reattached it at the severed joint, and quietly began to accumulate power. On the other side, Kondou, with a sword in hand, utilized his unique skill, Decipherer, to scrutinize Carrera's body. He then sensed a troublesome aura emanating from her, as the center of her magical power began forming a powerful crystallization of force. Kondou realized Carrera was on the verge of obtaining an ultimate skill and knew he had to act swiftly to eliminate her before she could achieve it. With this realization, he immediately took action, imbuing his military sword with the capabilities of his Lord of Judgment, and launched an attack. The sharp and heavy slash forced a groan from Carrera, who could only manage a bare defense against the flurry of light and shadow that Kondou's blade became. After several exchanges, Kondou's sword pierced Carrera's flank. Shocked and enraged by Kondou's surpassing strength, Carrera clutched her wound with her right hand, unable to heal due to the disruption of her magical circuits by the enemy's ultimate skill. Despite knowing Kondou's strength, she had not anticipated that even with Agera's power, they would still be dominated by Kondou. Carrera, as brash as she might be, recognized the direness of her situation. Continuing this way, she, one of the mightiest primordial demons, faced annihilation, something she could not allow, especially as it would contravene Rimura-sama's command. Until now, Carrera had relied solely on her pure demonic power in battle, but she understood that against opponents at the ultimate level, such as Diablo, Tatsuya Kondou, and of course, Guy at the pinnacle, struggle was futile. Pushed to this extremity, Carrera finally comprehended that to battle true powerhouses, one must possess an incomparably strong will and seek the essence of power more profoundly. At that moment, Carrera's prayer was made.
Then, let me offer you a bit of help.
Upon hearing those words, something within Carrera's innermost depths, stirred by her fervent prayer, began to take shape. This was the formation of a new ultimate skill born from the fervent power within her body, named Lord of Destruction, Abaddon. This absolute power of destruction was most fitting for Carrera, known as the Menace Lord. On the other side, Tatsuya Kondou was at a loss for words. After pushing Carrera to the brink, her awakening of an ultimate skill right when she was about to be vanquished, especially when his most powerful technique, Judgment Bullet, a trump card that could only be used once a day, had already been expended earlier in weakening Storm Dragon Veldora, presented him with a significant challenge. Kondou lamented the unreasonableness of demonkind, to which Carrera proudly countered that she belonged to the mightiest race, suggesting that it was actually Kondou who was the more absurdly formidable as a mere human. In a display of the highest respect she could muster, Carrera pointed her sword at Kondou and activated Lord of Destruction with both hands, launching her full might at him. A tumult of white and black brilliance swirled between them, with a mere aftershocks enough to blow people away. Carrera then unleashed Abyss Annihilation, the ultimate magic she conceived, surpassing even gravity collapse. A slight miscontrol could destroy planets, a force Carrera was not meant to wield, but at that moment, restraint was no longer her concern. Sensing the imminent threat, Kondou activated Lord of Judgment, staking everything on a technique he had covertly learned from Hakuru, the supreme sword skill of the hazy style, Cherry Blossoms, 8 petals flash, with an added power of judgment. Knowing he had to surpass his limits or face death, Kondou's sword split abyss annihilation vertically. Carrera, eyes wide yet smiling, found herself engulfed in the aftermath, while Kondou, despite the piercing pain, boldly aimed a finishing strike at Carrera's head with 8 petals flash. Carrera responded with her mightiest move, 100 petals rush, a strike faster than Kondou's draw, sending a flurry of blade lights at Kondou, who countered with his own 8 petals flash. As the light faded, both could no longer stand and collapsed to the ground. Kondou felt his strength ebbing away as he collapsed to the ground, closing his eyes and sinking into deep self-mockery. Once again, he had left things unfinished, accomplishing nothing whether before his reincarnation or after, whether in protecting his homeland or fulfilling his pact with Emperor Rudra. Just like Miss Shizu, who was on the brink of being killed in a war when she was summoned to this world for a new life, so too was Kondou brought here by Emperor Rudra. Thereafter, Tatsuya Kondou vowed to dedicate this new life to the Emperor, rising to become the first in the imperial ranks. With regret surfacing, distant memories slowly awakened. One day, Emperor Rudra had made a request of Tatsuya Kondou. Rudra explained that he had once asked Damrata to stop him and kill him if he ever lost sight of his ideals. But considering Damrata's gentle nature, Rudra doubted his ability to fulfill such a task, leading to his regret. Therefore, Rudra wished for the more dispassionate Tatsuya Kondou to undertake this mission and to interfere with Damrata's efforts. Like Damrata, Kondou inwardly resisted but could not bring himself to refuse Emperor Rudra's request. As a friend, he too wished for Rudra to live on. To him, Emperor Rudra was a great hero who had given him a new lease on life, an object of admiration, and a rare sovereign. Nonetheless, Kondou accepted Rudra's request, recognizing that the Emperor's radiant soul was reaching its limit. With his unique skill, decipher, Kondou understood Rudra's physical state even better than Rudra's beloved Velgrind. Thus, it was somewhat natural for Rudra to make such a pact with Tatsuya Kondou. However, there was still a long way to go before fulfilling that pact, as Rudra was then able to maintain control over his ultimate skill, Lord of Justice. But was that really the case? On the verge of death, Kondou's thoughts were tumultuous. The later Rudra occasionally showed a cold gaze and made judgments that were too detached. Damrata often fretted over this. Why did Rudra ask Kondou to hinder Damrata from killing him? Kondou, following Rudra's orders, had once controlled Damrata, and now in retrospect, it might have been a grave mistake. If he didn't want to upset Damrata, couldn't he have simply told Damrata to stop from the beginning? Realizing this, Kondou saw through the truth, and his mood cleared. Tatsuya Kondou understood that he had been under the control of the Lord of Justice for some time. The current Rudra was undoubtedly dominated by his own ultimate skill, becoming the Lord of Justice, or perhaps, the person who asked Kondou to obstruct Damrata from killing him was already the Lord of Justice. Realizing this too late, Kondou could no longer rectify the situation. Kondou felt utterly useless, having achieved nothing, either in sharing Rudra's troubles nor in alleviating his pain. And now, Kondou didn't even have the strength to move a finger, and the promise to stop Rudra could only accompany his regrets to the grave. As he was about to succumb to eternal sleep, Carrera's voice reached his ears, shouting for Kondou to get up and continue their fight. Opening his eyes, Kondou saw the demon with dazzling golden hair. Carrera looked extremely displeased, yet her face was exceptionally beautiful. Kondou gave a bitter smile, saying he was about to leave this world and could no longer continue fighting. Carrera, too, was nearly depleted of energy, her body on the verge of collapse, but she still simply wanted to decide the outcome of their battle. Thinking this, Kondou smiled, wishing to move his body once more, but failed. Indeed, he could no longer do anything. Yet, Kondou envied the straightforward and free-spirited golden-haired demon before him. Inexplicably, he asked Carrera to take his gun and use it to kill Emperor Rudra. Hearing this, Carrera picked up the Nambu's semi-automatic gun that had fallen to the ground. Carrera looked at the pistol and remarked that it was already broken. Kondou indulged in self-mockery once more, deriding himself for naively believing a demon would fulfill a promise, as his consciousness began to fade again. However, Carrera's beautiful voice drew him back once more. Carrera stated that giving up just because the gun was broken did not seem characteristic of the Tatsuya Kondou who had just provided her with an enjoyable battle. Then, Carrera mentioned she could undertake the task of killing the Emperor, but it would require compensation. Negotiating a contract with a demon always demanded a price. Although referred to as compensation, Carrera was known as a demon with whom negotiation was impossible. Yet, this time was different. Facing Carrera, who somewhat embarrassed and flustered, Kondou couldn't help but laugh. He offered everything he had, including his soul, to Carrera. Using the last of his strength, to convey his wish to Carrera, to imprint her beautiful visage into his memory, and to bring redemption to his otherwise futile existence, Kondou gazed at Carrera with eyes full of resolute will, making one final gamble. Carrera acknowledged Kondou's wish, affirming the contract under the name of Menace Lord Carrera, promising to fulfill Tatsuya Kondou's desire. Hearing this authoritative voice, Kondou smiled contentedly. Then, with hands that had barely any strength left, he slowly raised them, his fingertips touching the pistol in Carrera's hand, which began to emit a golden glow. Under the influence of Kondou's power, the pistol gradually returned to its original form before evolving into a weapon of mythic grade. Tatsuya Kondou's soul merged into the pistol, which Carrera took possession of, along with the gun. Of course, this didn't include Kondou's core. As a person who had reached the state of innocence, his core was no longer bound by anyone. It would depart from the cycle of reincarnation by its own will, heading towards the promised place for liberation. Carrera felt a tinge of loneliness, having rarely encountered such a spirited and intriguing opponent. However, at that moment, the voice came again.
Then, let's integrate the ultimate skill Lord of Judgment into Lord of Destruction.
Carrera hastily shifted her gaze towards the pistol, which now flickered with an even brighter radiance, appearing and disappearing as if to say you would not be alone anymore. Carrera understood, Tatsuya Kondou was now with her. Following this was Tatsuya Kondou's mocking voice, critiquing Carrera's poor use of magic, offering to teach her a better way. Carrera felt irritated, arguing with the voice, calling it a meddlesome, arrogant fellow, treating her like a child. With these thoughts, Carrera no longer felt lonely. Despite being gravely injured, she stood up and walked towards the gate. The enemy still existed, and the most important promise had to be fulfilled. Alright, that's all for this video. In this episode, Carrera and Tatsuya Kondou both demonstrated formidable strength, and their battle fostered an unusual bond between them. The unyielding and unreasonable Carrera also made a pact with Tatsuya Kondou. Thus, the fifth gate of the eight-gate formation was breached. In our next episode, we will discuss the situations of the remaining gates, the battle between Testarossa and Velgrind, the slacking Diablo, and the appearance of Spectre Lord Felway. The content of the next episode will be dense, so make sure not to miss it. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.